On today's episode, we're discussing the Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground laws, and what you can do to improve your survival odds both at home and on the road. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Survival Dispatch podcast. We're calling it now. Hope everyone had a good and safe weekend. Another great topic of discussion today. We listen to you guys. So when we post the surveys and the questions, we read the comments, and a lot of you guys are asking about the topic we're discussing today. And it's a topic that I think is extremely important. And it's really, I'm going to call it an epic topic. It's a huge point of thought and conversation that we should all have. And that is the Castle Doctrine. What is it, and how can we secure our homes and places of travel? How does the Castle Doctrine pertain to that? And just being safer on the road and be able to increase our odds of survivability. As a note, folks, those of you who have made comments that are searching for our survival downrange videos, most of the firearms videos, the gun videos, we have taken those down from YouTube, but don't worry, we have reposted them elsewhere. So if you want to be able to view that exclusive content that big tech likes to suppress, we're going to provide a link to you guys so that you can become a Survival Dispatch insider and have access to exclusive content like that and other stuff that you won't see us posting here on our regular YouTube channel. So again, we'll have that link below. So we are very pleased to have another self-defense subject matter expert and the author of 21st Century Minuteman, Sal DeGennaro, joining us once again. Welcome back, Sal.
Danny, thanks for having me back for another epic discussion, I'm certain.
We definitely are having some epic discussions these days, and we are on a roll. I've actually lost count of how many episodes we've done together now. I think maybe 4 or 5 thus far. And you really appreciate the information that you're providing us, because our whole goal here is to provide, is to give everybody better odds of survival out there, and especially as it pertains to urban survival, which is a real thing these days. Actually, it's been a real thing for a long time. I think we're just aware of a lot more that's going on in the world because of the media that we have now, Sal. So appreciate your comments and your knowledge. By the way, folks, we'll have a link down in the description so you can check out Sal's book, 21st Century Minuteman, and some of the other awesome articles that he has written as well. So, Castle Doctrine. I don't expect, Sal, everybody to understand what that means, Castle Doctrine, and what the actual definition of that term is. That's a term that we've heard on media over the past several years quite a bit. And can you just kind of define that? Let's start the discussion off and talk about Castle Doctrine, if you would.
Certainly. So the usual disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, not a lawyer, right? And we always mention that. With that said, I remind people that the truth is self-defense law is a niche within the legal discipline. So even saying that, don't think just because somebody is an attorney, they're an expert on that particular field of law, because actually in law school, most attorneys touch on that very little. So bear that in mind. So the truth is, many people kind of in our space of firearms instruction and that kind of thing probably do a lot more research than your average attorney. Now, fortunately, we're blessed in this nation that we have a number of attorneys who are really at the top of the heap specifically for legal doctrine as far as it pertains to personal protection and self-defense. Again, I will throw out 2 names. Andrew Branca, he is an attorney who wrote the excellent Law of Self-Defense. Go to Law of Self-Defense website. You can actually get the book. I think they still actually offer the book for free. Don't quote me on that, but for a long time they did. So don't even look on Amazon for it, although it's on Amazon as well. And of course, there is a name probably many people are familiar with. That is Massad Ayoob, who is also not an attorney, but he has decades and decades of experience as an expert witness in the courtroom, and he is actually one of the absolute leaders in the field of self-defense law, even though he's not an attorney, but he has that vast knowledge from being an expert witness, and he has written several books on exactly this topic. And I encourage people, if nothing else, and both of those gentlemen who I just mentioned by name actually teach classes, so certainly if you can take their classes, do so. But if nothing else, read The Law of Self-Defense and read Massad Ayoob's most recent recent book on specifically self-defense law, and you will be so far ahead of the curve understanding these principles. I don't really know those guys outside of exchanging some emails at some point, but I always plug them because they are absolutely the two thought leaders in this particular field of law. So
this survival dispatch video is brought to you by Nutrient Survival. Nourish your body, power your mind.
So with that said, pertaining to castle doctrine, there's a lot of misconceptions as to what that is. Most states have at least some form of castle doctrine because the principle of castle doctrine is actually a legal principle that goes all the way back to Old English law, actually goes back to England even before the American colonies were founded. And essentially, it's the idea that a man's home is his castle. Now, what it boils down to in our modern legal landscape is generally castle doctrine protects you from really only one facet in the whole gamut of self-defense, and that is it removes the burden to have to retreat from danger in your own home. And really, that's all it means. So the states, and a majority of states, by the way, have what's called stand your ground. We know that the press loves to pick on Florida and the stand your ground law. And ironically, all of the cases that they talk about with stand your ground had nothing to do with stand your ground. The George Zimmerman case had nothing to do with stand your ground. There's been a whole litany of cases out of Florida that they talk about stand your ground to make it look the Wild West where people can just shoot each other in the streets. It's nothing to do with that. Stand your ground basically says that if you are somewhere in public that you have the legal right to be, like, for example, if you're standing online to buy tickets at a movie theater, you are not obligated to retreat from violence, from a threat, if one is presented. Okay. Now, logically, if you want to be smart about it, if you can safely retreat, you should always do that. Why would you want to get into a fight, right, if you don't have to? Now, the thing about it is, even in the states that have that rather do not have stand your ground, you are only required to retreat from danger if you can safely do so. With castle doctrine, generally you are not required to flee your home if you are facing a threat that has entered the home. That is really all castle doctrine is. It gives you that one basically greater element of legal protection. And realistically, how can we most of the time safely flee our home? If you have a family, are you going to flee out the back door if home invaders come in through the front door when you have children upstairs? Of course not. Castle doctrine basically says that you have no legal obligation to retreat from danger when you are in your home. With that said, it does not in any way give you magical powers to use excessive force where you would not be legally able to do so in public. For example, if somebody is in your home and it turns out they're not actually a threat, maybe it's your teenage son's friend who you've never met. He looks like an adult male. You find him in the living room. He's not doing anything threatening. Can you kill him? That's going to be a bad day for you, right? So it does not by any means give you special privileges to use excessive force. It simply lifts the requirement to have to flee your own home to flee from a threat if you can safely do so. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And as you're speaking of this, I spent a lot of time between Florida and Illinois. I've got family in Illinois. We have stand your ground in Florida, and castle doctrine is very, very strong there. Stand your ground is very strong, very big topic there. We do not have a stand your ground statute in the state of Illinois. However, they do have a castle doctrine, and there are some verified cases on that. But as you're speaking, I'm listening to these definitions, and I have a pretty good idea what castle doctrine meant, but you expounded on a couple of things. And one of the questions that popped up in my mind was, castle doctrine, can castle doctrine also pertain to where you're living other than your home? Is it applicable to, you spend a lot of time on the road, and so do I. Gosh, I've lived out of hotel rooms half of my life, it seems, and you likewise, I'm sure. So how does it apply to, does castle doctrine apply to hotel rooms? Does it?
Right. Typically it does, because that is perhaps temporary, but that is your abode at that time. Hotel room, Airbnb, an RV if you're traveling by RV. Again, so this is your place of residence. There's simply the legal doctrine of you are not required to flee the place of residence in the face of a threat. So again, it does not give you any kind of magical power to do whatever you want to do beyond that. Right. And I want to make that really clear to people, just like stand your ground. The media that lies about everything will tell you that stand your ground makes the streets run with blood because everybody does their own thing. And they make it the purge or something. You can just go murder people who you don't like because it's a stand your ground state. Right. I remind everybody, California has stand your ground law. The majority of states have it. But I encourage everybody, always in public, behave as if your state does not have it, because anytime you can actually retreat from danger instead of having to go to force, that is a potential life-ruining court proceeding that you don't have to have, right? So that's always the way to play it. But essentially, castle doctrine is in every state. There may be certain nuances, but that's an overall principle in pretty much every state, that if you're in your residence, permanent or temporary, that you're not legally required.
As I've done my research on castle doctrine, one sort of phrase sort of stuck in my mind, and that is hanging your hat. It's where you hang your hat, whether it's your permanent residence, an apartment, temporary residence, trailer, house, boat. Could be a boat, could be a camper. Could be a hotel room, etc. But yes, always familiarize yourself. Your state laws, always consult legal advice if you ever have any questions. And we are not, I don't want to be a lawyer. We are not lawyers here, but a very pertinent discussion. So castle doctrine is not stand your ground, although stand your ground can be associated with castle doctrine in certain states. So castle doctrine seems virtually everywhere. Stand your ground is not.
Correct.
We do have stand your ground in Florida. We do not have it when I come and spend time with my family in Illinois. And these are things that I have to remember, that we have to think about this. It's a huge responsibility when we're concealed carrying, for instance, and to be aware of those laws. And sometimes we are required to retreat, as you said, from threats, depending on where we are, and sometimes not. And as always, when you can safely, you should. Obviously, we're not out there trying to be gunslingers, or you shouldn't, and that's going to eventually get you in trouble. But man, I can't believe we haven't discussed this already, Sal. This is a big deal, man.
It is a big deal. And it's important that people are aware of these principles. And again, as far as stand your ground, always conduct yourself as if you're in a place that does not have stand your ground. That is going to be safest for you, because even if you have that principle in place, if you stand there and don't retreat when you could, you're going to be dealing with something that is potentially life-altering. It's almost always life-altering following a violent encounter. Why would you if you have the option to retreat? So it should be a no-brainer. It's common sense.
It just makes sense. If we're going to discuss castle doctrine, your house is your castle, your home is your castle, we should definitely speak to securing your home and making it a safer place to be, securing it better against potential attacks, potential home invaders, whether you're home or in a temporary living space, traveling, etc. Let's do that. Let's just go there.
Do you want premium ad-free content? Duh. Content that's not censored by big tech, of course. Well, with SD Insider, you can get behind the scenes and a whole lot more. Link in the description.
We're going to go there. We're going to talk about securing your home, making it a safer place to live. Let's kick off that discussion, if you would, Sal.
Certainly. So in my book, when I tackle the subject of home defense, again, what I always try to do is offer things in the easiest possible way to analyze and think about something, right? The simpler we can make it, the better. So I don't claim that I invented this, because it's a kind of a universal principle with the people who think about these things. But what I did was I basically condense everything into three categories, and think of 3 Ds. You need to deter, you need to detect, and you need to defend. So the principle of 3 Ds. And again, that's nothing unique from me. Those are established principles, but I think it's cool coming up with the acronym 3 Ds, right? So think of it in that term. It makes it easier to remember, right? We have 3 layers layers of home defense in place. We want to deter encroachment on the home. We absolutely must be able to detect it in order to have time to prepare for it. And finally, we must have a plan to be able to ballistically defend that home, right?
Yeah,
if everything else fails.
I love that 3D, and I'm making notes. This is like I'm in class right now. I hope you guys are taking notes, our viewers today. This is great.
Right.
I love where this is going. I'm getting excited about it, and I'm also thinking in the back of my head, I can take these 3D layers and apply them just about anywhere. But let's stay on the home base here, and let's talk about each of those. Deter, detect, and defend. So at home, deterring that potential home invasion. And in my mind, I immediately go to what does deter, what is one of the number one things that deters theft? Well, or invasion or attacks or violence. And I know from my previous experience as a law enforcement officer and the research that I've done and through the years having discussions with experts like yourself, that most bad stuff happens at night. So in my mind, I immediately go to light, sources of light. Light is a deterrence to bad stuff. Would you agree? I know you do.
Absolutely. And a lot of these tools that we'll talk about actually can overlap between those 3Ds. So, for example, a hardened door that is very difficult to kick in may not only deter eventually, maybe they'll give up, but it's going to also allow you to detect through the noise, right? So there's a lot of these tools that we may talk about span the scope of all three. And interestingly enough, to your point, nighttime. Now, the bad home invasions and most often the very violent things do happen at night. Though statistically, the past few years, most home incursions, just burglaries, actually happen during the day now. Because they know that people are typically at work. They're going to target places where they think nobody's home. Kids are at school. Parents are at work. They're going to come in and ransack the place to steal valuables. So just statistically. Now, with that said, what often happens is just the common burglar who wants to steal something might presume the place is empty and they come in there and the homeowner is there and then things turn violent, right? Yeah. So that does happen. But where you see our mind typically goes to at night, if somebody breaks into your house at 3 a.m., it should go without saying there's probably very nefarious intent there, right? It's not 3 o'clock in the afternoon where they presume nobody's in the house. Why are they coming at that time? So to your point, Denny, you're really right with saying at night is really what we have to worry about here. And certainly the third D of defend is going to be very important at night. If nobody's home in the daytime, though, we would still want to consider the deter and the detect abilities.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, of course, we can go back to medieval times and go to that hardened doorway or that gate or that entranceway to the fort or the domicile or the castle or whatever. There's that castle word again coming back around. And obviously, yes, securing that door, the door that can do all three of those things. The door, the light. I talk about dogs as a canine subject matter expert. Dogs are near and dear to my heart, and having lived my whole life with dogs and working dogs, so that's something kind of pops into my head because a large barking dog or even a small dog that will detect somebody's presence and make noise, in my mind, can be a deterrence as well.
And detection, right? Deterrence and detection. Yep.
And there are millions of dogs in our country, and that's something we need to think about as well. I think dogs too. So the 3Ds, man. If I took nothing away from today's discussion already, I'm going to remember those 3Ds: deter, detect, and defend. I love that.
And Denny, just to each one of those, we could spend hours, right, discussing all the great ideas for each one of those. But just in a nutshell, when you think of deterrence, I hate to say it this way, but this is the world we live in. If you live in suburbia, basically what you're looking to do is make your home look less appealing than your neighbor's home. And I hate to be callous about that, but listen, that's survival, right? So when somebody scopes out the neighborhood looking at houses they want to hit, we want them to see with our own property a house with shrubbery and yard work that makes it hard to come undetected to windows. We want them to see Maybe fencing that keeps certain entries off limits. We want them to see, to your point, lights. Lights is huge. That's a big one. I love motion detection lights, right? That turn on when something is moving in the vicinity.
Oh yeah.
In fact, I
for
set
sure.
them up. I set them up so the whole perimeter, when one turns on, it triggers the rest.
Oh,
So that the
okay.
whole
I
and
like that.
you can buy them very affordably. Look on Amazon. There's all kinds of sets, 4, 6, 8 lights, however many outdoor lights that they all link to each other, and they'll all turn on when one turns on. So these are the things that will deter criminal entity. And a dog is a big one. Even if you have just a tiny dog, if they walk by, because they will probe. They will test the place that they're thinking about hitting. And they walk up to the door or walk by on the sidewalk and they hear a dog barking. That's another no-go on their checklist. So you want to think about the deterrence. That's a big part of it.
And we should obviously consider some of the technological advances that have come along and add this to the discussion as well. And immediately I'm thinking about Ring doorbells, for instance. It's kind of the go-to these days for not only detection of someone, but also being able to identify people and add that communication aspect as well. So I think I don't know actually too many people that don't have those that live in, say, a residential or urban type neighborhood these days. I just about everybody I know has some version of that, Sal. I would say
most do now, and again, that's a good deterrence as well. But I will point to the fact that how many videos can we find taking off the Ring camera of a group of 5 or 6 guys wearing masks who still come and kick down a door?
Yeah.
So as much deterrence as we have, that brings us to the next thing, which to me, the detect category is what is truly, truly important for home defense, as opposed to just self-defense in general. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I think you're better off with a snub-nosed revolver next to you at night and a good system for detection than you are with no system of detection with an AR-15 and body armor next to you. And the reason for that is if you wake up at dark 30 with a guy in a mask standing over you, it doesn't matter what weaponry you have at that point, right? You are absolutely behind the curve. So that's why I say that I would rather have a house set up with the right kind of alarm systems that's going to wake me up out of a dead sleep and give me time to prepare than having the best weaponry. I would rather have the snub revolver and a great layer of detection than the best weaponry, yet no detection, and risk waking up with home invaders standing over you, which is absolutely, as you would imagine, the worst case scenario.
Unfortunately, it's happened to people more often than not. Yeah, and there is a practicality, I think, to choosing the right tools to defend your home. And although many of us have the aforementioned tools that you mentioned, there's a lot to be said for just a good working revolver or pistol and maybe an auxiliary light source.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying only have that as your house gun. My point was that serves you better if you're awake and ready than if you wake up with somebody standing over you and you have an AR-15 in the closet, right? So it's all important. So the detection, that's where we really want to leverage some of the modern capability. And if you don't want to have a commercial alarm system, I've been through a number of those. I've been generally disappointed with most of them in terms of their ability to, first of all, they trigger a lot of false alarms, no matter what you seem to do. And then in my experience, a couple of times when the alarm went off, law enforcement, they didn't even call back. They didn't respond. One time it went off and we didn't even realize that we canceled it, that we rather failed to cancel it in time. And an hour and a half later, they called back and said, hey, is everything? I put very little stock in the ability of that to notify law enforcement. It might be a plus, but you can't rely on it. So if you don't want to go down the route of having a paid for subscription to an alarm service, there is so much great stuff where you can do it yourself. And for me personally, my main goal is to have a system that wakes me up out of a dead sleep when a portal is breached. And that's all
Yeah.
I care about. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have my spouse dial 911, right? That's
Yep.
what I care about. It's got to wake me up.
Two things come to mind here, and my brain is, my gears are just really turning here, like a gerbil on Red Bull spinning the wheel. Most of the commercial alarm systems are monitored by third parties. For one thing, you're relying on an additional source of communication to call the first responder, then to come back and respond to your issue. That, how reliable are they actually going to be? Are they actually doing their job, or asleep at the desk in the middle of the night when their computer screen pops up and says alarm at Salvador de Janeiro's house? And the other issue is the term first responder in itself. As a former law enforcement officer, and I know law enforcement in your family as well, man, we can't just, as cops, we just can't snap our finger and be there. It's going to take time. It's going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get to wherever you are, depending on what precinct you're in an urban environment. You need to be your first responder. And absolutely. That doesn't mean don't call 911. Absolutely call 911, because, and I would like you to speak to this, Sal. So if you have a real life situation at home, someone's burst into your home in the middle of the night and you're in fear of serious physical injury, death, call that 911. Keep them on the phone, because you are laying down evidence that's going to be presented in court. I'm not a lawyer, again, disclaimer, but that is so important to say, I hear them, they're getting closer. I can see him through the crack. He's got a gun, blah, blah, blah. You're laying down that evidence that those 12 people are going to, on the jury, are going to hear if it comes down to that. You have to shoot to defend your life. You have to kill somebody to defend your life. So really, these are scary scenarios. These are things we need to think about. It could happen, and we never know when it's going to happen. And that's another reason to always be prepared with your training, right, Sal? And even these discussions are fantastic, but if you don't, and you and your family members don't keep your training up and have that family plan, which you and I have discussed in many different scenarios, God forbid, worse things can happen. So where do we want to go from here? I know I'm maybe taking a sidetrack.
No, that's fine. The one last thing I would say about detection, one of my favorite options is motion detection. And you can buy very cheaply kits that have really, they're typically sold as alarm systems for the driveway. So they see the motion of vehicles when they come in. But the truth is you can put them anywhere. And in fact, even when we travel, you can set them up in hotel rooms, Airbnbs, etc. So what they consist of is you can get them in packs of 2, 4, 6, 8, however many sensors. And it's a motion sensor, not different than what's built onto a motion sensing light. Okay. And the sensor you can mount on any wall. And what I do is I mount them at looking at the portals. So it's looking at the doors. I'll set them up so that, and sometimes you have to be a bit creative, like if you have pets in the house or kids who are up and about before you are in the day, etc.
That's a good.
I set them up so they're just looking at the doors, because I don't, it's not a camera that I'm looking to capture faces. I just need to see the movement. So I set them up so that all portals are under surveillance for motion. And when I go to bed at night, I simply plug in the receiver next to me at night. And there is nothing that can come into any portal of the house without tripping that motion sensor, and it's going to wake me up. So that's my favorite method for securing. And again, they're portable, the whole bundle of it. You could have the receiver and 4 or 5 sensors in a bundle this big and take them with you.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to buy myself an early Christmas present, I think.
It's a great option.
That sounds fantastic. So I think this is a great segue to jump from the home, maybe to like a hotel room. Let's create some scenarios and talk about that, Sal. We're on the road, we're traveling, we're doing some business, we're in the hotel room. Let's talk about being safer and securing your hotel. What's one of the first things you do when you check into a hotel on the road? What do we do?
Absolutely. So let's start at the lobby, actually entering the hotel. Whether you're domestic or international, when you walk in there, look around, who's there, what are they doing, right? That's back to our situational awareness principles. Is somebody paying too much attention to you, right? You want to notice that stuff, because people following guests up to hotel rooms and shoving them in the door and then robbing them in the room or before they get to the room, that happens. Who's there? What are they doing? Is somebody paying too much attention to you? The other thing is, I never want the receptionist at a hotel to tell me the number of the room because I don't know
Yeah.
who's listening. Most modern hotels, they don't do that. They hand you the card, right? And it's written on
Yeah.
there. But if they blurt out, oh, your room number is whatever on whatever floor, and there's people around, I'll say, assign me a new room number and don't tell me out loud the number. I'll actually tell them that.
Yeah,
Again,
and
it's
you
it's
shouldn't
rare
be
these
embarrassed
days.
to do so.
No,
Yeah, you
not at
should.
all. And
Yeah,
it's rare these days that they do, but if they blurt it out loud, have them assign you a new
yeah.
hotel room. So you want to be aware of what's around you when you check into the hotel. When you go to the room, oh, and let me mention before that, it's always kind of a debate what floor, if you have the choice. Should you stay on a higher floor? Should you stay on a lower floor? Just simple rule of thumb for myself. I know there's guys out there who will like have the ideal. I stay in the west wing, facing whatever direction and on the third floor, whatever. For me, simple rule of thumb. I don't like to be on street level because if there's windows, people can smash through the window and come in. Okay.
Okay.
But I also, if I have the preference, I don't like being on the 30th floor just in case, whatever. So
Yeah.
above street level, but if you have the preference, I would take, for example, the 5th floor instead of the 50th floor, if you're in some
Yeah.
huge hotel in an urban area. But that's just rule of thumb. Big thing is, I don't like to be on the ground level, or if you have like a courtyard where there's pool and stuff and your glass is directly facing that. Again, that simply gives it access to people who could smash through and come and rob things.
Yeah, I know when I check into hotel rooms on the road, I want some sleep because it's not easy to sleep, especially if you have an airport
Higher is
nearby.
better
And
with that.
I always ask, I said, can you put me somewhere where there's nobody above me? I don't want to be, and let me back up a little bit, Sal. I no longer stay in the Roach Motel situations. I want to have to walk inside and take the stairs or an elevator up to my room because it seems like that immediately is going to make it a little safer
No
versus the cheaper motels that have the external entrance to each room, right? I think that's a really legitimate concern, and just take that in consideration when I'm making those decisions. I also love to be able to look out my window and see my vehicle as well to protect my
That's a great point.
belongings.
Yep.
So I keep that in mind, and I do ask about that. If I find, and I love to see the light. If they have a diagram of the hotel, I like to see that diagram at the front desk, see where I'm at, and see where everything else is. If I'm in Chicago or Dallas or New York or Miami or out west somewhere, especially in those larger metropolitan areas, the hotels tend to be bigger. I want to, and also that also gives me a better idea of the exits. If there is a disaster, a larger scale problem, and I need to exit, I'm not necessarily in my room. So I would suggest that we keep that in mind as well. I've seen some pretty cool stuff as it pertains to securing hotel doors. And I've also seen some really sketchy, easy ways to break into hotel rooms with the doors. And some are freaking scary, man. Like easily you could break it. And it doesn't matter. You got the little flippy thing. Those are useless, in my opinion. Can you speak to that?
So, first of all, when you go into the room, I highly encourage people to get in the habit of check every inch of that room when you go in. I actually personally know 2 people who have gone into a room that they just bought, get assigned the card, and there's somebody in the room. One time it was a nefarious thing.
That could be really dangerous.
Speaking of which, how most hotel rooms have the big ceiling to floor curtains to block out sunlight. Check behind those. An adult male can actually hide behind those, and I know of an incident where that happened. So you go into the hotel room, check every inch of it, check behind those curtains, check under the bed if the bed has an underside. And again, people will accuse us of being paranoid, but I know personally of people who have had that happen. Scope out the whole room. Securing the door, you bring up a great point with that. One of the best devices that you can use is take one of the little triangular shaped rubber door stops and cut the tip of it off, because I don't like it protruding under the door so it can be seen the tip. So if you look how far it goes under a door, like cut that half an inch or quarter of an inch off or whatever sticks out so it's invisible, but it still works. And those things are like magic. You cannot push a door open with one of those rubber door stop wedges under it. You can't.
That is so simple.
It's so simple.
Easy.
And even if you just have check-in baggage, one bag, it's literally this big. but you put that under the door and kick it, and Hulk Hogan cannot push the door open with that thing under it. So that is the simplest possible tool that you can carry that will truly secure the door. And then you don't have to rely on just the lock or even that stupid little swing thing, which again, a solid kick would kick that right off the bracket.
That's probably the best suggestion I've heard in a long time for securing hotel room doors. And I didn't even think about it. I see all these gadgets for sale. I watch the videos. There are even techniques that you can take the one of the towels in the bathroom and wrap it up and do a little configuration with the door. So it's definitely. I'm adding that to my travel list. Sal.
Hey, listen, better than nothing,
suggestion.
all those different things, but I'm telling you, like a $2 or $3 rubber door stop is the single gadget that is truly incredible how well it works because it just grips and it's physics and you cannot push that door open.
Yeah. Going back to those little portable alarms, the motion detector alarms, are those the ones that send off the high pitch sound when they detect motion, or some of them can, I assume?
So the ones that I use and that I like for in the house actually has a receiver, and the receiver, you can set it all different ways, like a real high pitch thing or like a phone alarm, anything like that. I actually leave it at a volume and a sound that'll wake me up, but not terrify everybody. Now for hotel rooms, what I think is a great option is just the door alarms, things you can stick on the door. It's got a magnetic piece and then the sensor piece. So if the door opens, it goes off, and those things are loud as hell. Very piercing sound. So just turn it on when you go to bed, and between the door stop and that thing, you're going to know when somebody's tampering with that door.
I literally have one of those that I keep in my truck for just that purpose.
That's a great idea.
Cheap. Yeah. They're really cheap. $5-10 on mine. The key is just have fresh batteries in them, and they work, and you can put them anywhere, and they're fantastic. Talking about deterrence, if someone does break in or open a hotel, say break in, open, of course, they probably want to be as quiet as possible to break into a hotel room. Maybe they don't want to wake up, they just want to steal your stuff, or maybe they think you're gone and they want to get in, and that motion detector goes off and that high-pitched sound goes, alarm sounds. If I'm a bad guy breaking into a room and I want to stay alive and not get caught by the police, I'm going to leave immediately. I don't want to be caught in that room with that. It is a deterrence as well. So we could probably talk all night long about hotel rooms, but there are probably some other categories. Right, Sal? What about, it's not an easy one, but I want to ask you about securing outdoor spaces. What about when we're camping? I have ideas on this, but I want to hear what Sal De Janeiro thinks about securing an outdoor space like a camping, a hunting location, or maybe even an entrance to a property or something like that. And maybe some of the methods for setting. We're talking about all these alerts on. So let's go down that road next.
Sure. So now this becomes more complicated, right? Because any indoor space, we usually have a door or maybe several doors, but we have portals of some kind that realistically somebody's going to have to come through a portal. Now, in an outdoors, they could come from anywhere. However, even in outdoor spaces where there are roadways and entrances of some kind, that is the most likely places. What I have found in my own experience over years of dealing with sketchy areas at hunting camps and that kind of thing is dirt bags are very emboldened when they can drive up close to the place. If they can't drive and have to walk, they're probably not going to walk in. And that's not a universal truth, but it is a universal statistically accurate factor we can go with. They are simply less likely to get out of a vehicle and walk in because now they feel vulnerable, right? They don't know
that, and thieves are lazy. Thieves are lazy.
Right.
They want to be able to do the grab and go.
Absolutely.
Get out of the vehicle, get the stuff, get back in the vehicle, and get away.
So one thing I've done over the years, and I've been to a number of properties where for hunting specifically, that like you are literally in the wilderness and there is nobody around. You talk about being your first responder. There are no other responders. They might be several hours away by helicopter, right? So if you're in a space though that has a roadway, even just some kind of primitive dirt trail that leads in, a lot of properties will have a gate already. Right. I know that years ago, my family owned a property that we gated off. We always did that just to make it that much harder for people to enter. But even if you're in a place that is not gated off, what you can do is with your own vehicle, and I've done this many times, the vehicle so it blocks that road off. Now, I'm not saying block off a public road. I'm saying that if it's the entrance to a property and only you are supposed to be on that property, I pull a
Yeah.
vehicle right across. I find two big trees and I pull the vehicle across so that it's lengthwise so that another vehicle can't get around it. And again, now we're at the point where if people want to do bad things, they have to do it on foot. They can't drive right up to a camp spot where you might just be in a tent or maybe an RV, but either one, you're fairly vulnerable. I want to
Yeah.
prevent them from bringing vehicles in if I can.
Not only that, but you're letting them know, hey, somebody's here right now.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not an empty campsite with a bunch of valuable stuff that you can just walk in and steal as well. That's what I think in my mind. I see a lot of cool little gadgets advertised online. I've seen a bunch of them on social media lately for perimeter alarms. For campsites and things like that, some of which look a little sketchy, some of which look like, hey, that's pretty cool. I assume you've seen those, and maybe we can speak to those a little bit as well.
Problem with perimeter defense stuff is, my experience, they get triggered by every damn thing in the wood. Runs over it, a deer, right? That tends to be the biggest downside. But
yeah, you'd have to have a motion detector. It'd be, nocturnal animals,
right?
Would
exactly,
set it
would go off all night.
However, you would sleep.
However, consider what we were talking about, motion detecting lights, because again, that is a big deterrence if people walk up to a campsite and all of a sudden there's bright lights illuminating them. So that's probably something they're facing away from you. Wouldn't necessarily wake you up all night with all the animals walking past it, but it's going to be some deterrence for somebody walking up on you, right? And you could position them so that, let's say you're in a tent, right? The most vulnerable possible place we could think of. Well, if you position a couple of those lights, and you can buy them now, little 1,000 lumen lights, just set them up on the ground or wherever. Now you put yourself at a tremendous advantage. If anybody coming up to that tent has the light in their face, right? This is basic tactics. If you're looking into the light and now us in our tent, we're behind the light, that is some advantage. And these are all courtesy of this modern technology we have. 20 years ago, there was no such thing as 1,000 lumen flashlight or motion. And we still made it work with old-fashioned mag lights and stuff in the woods. But now take advantage of the technology that we have. Illumination is a big one.
Speaking to illumination and the second D in your 3Ds, detect. There have been times when I've been at some fairly primitive hunting camps and in a tent at night, and I've got a light inside of my tent, but there's not much light outside. And on some overcast nights, I walked outside to take a leak or just check the perimeter or do something, whatever. And it takes a while for me to even be able to see where I'm going. And obviously I had to have a flashlight in my hand immediately. I'm of a mind that when I am in that kind of scenario, I try to deter night blindness for myself as much as possible, so that if I need to be in a tent, don't always, but sometimes I do, especially if I'm in a colder environment, that I can see where I'm going and be able to detect things better. And those things are not always people, and sometimes they're animals that I want to detect and maybe possibly have to defend myself against. So I've got a good friend that lives up in the Great White North, as I call it, and he's been inviting me for years to come up and go bear hunting with him up there. And I'm going to take him up on it one of these days.
I was going to say,
I think about those things. I'm one of these guys. I'm not going to go up there unprepared. I'm going to pick his brain because he's the expert up there. And then I'm going to do I'm going to take the right equipment things with me as well to be able to do that. Don't have to worry so much about the bad guys up there as the animals. But
four-legged bad guy.
Exactly, the four-legged bad guy. So I really love your concept of using that light as deterrence and detection from bad stuff to happen. That can also help with possible wildlife that could injure you as well, versus an alarm system that's going to set off.
Because keep you up all night. Keep you awake.
And you've seen the one-shot the blank firing perimeter alarms, which look really cool. Every outdoor kid in the country probably ordered one of those off of Amazon by now. But it's a one-shot deal. They fire. You have to set up a tripwire. It has to be set up just right. It has to be the right sensitivity and to be able to pull that little pin out, which essentially releases a firing pin to hit a primer on a blank, so to speak. And it's a one-time deal. And are those things useful? Can you figure any practical use for those?
So the problem I would see with it is that you're gonna have false alarms all the time. That's the primary problem I could see with that. I guess it may have a true use if maybe not so much being in the middle of the woods, but if you're in a remote cabin or something and you're expecting trouble, I could see it being useful maybe there, right? Where
Yeah.
you would set it up like if somebody tries to come up the front stairs, it's going to trigger it, something like that. But I would agree with you that in the middle of the woods, it's just going to trip by every darn furry thing all night long. So I don't see it being too useful for like campsite defense. So there's just a lot of tools. What you were talking about with wildlife, I would mention that illumination is startlingly effective on animals. I have
I
found
would
that
agree.
because
Yep.
they associate that with humans and they're afraid
Yep.
of it. I was actually overseas. I won't talk about where, but let's just say not in the not in the U.S. period. I wasn't armed with a firearm, of course. That particular area has a lot of wild street dogs.
Huh.
But when they're in packs, can be
Yeah.
kind of
Oh yeah.
edgy. So
Oh
so
yeah.
I was actually walking after a party to the car, which was parked kind of like in an alley. Now it's a place where violent crime is almost nil. But I found it interesting how I was walking back to the car and there was a group of 8 large wild dogs. They're like feral in that area. And they were like around a heap of trash or something. They kind of gave me the creeps the way they were eyeing me up. Man, I hit them with my 1,000 lumen carry light and they
Yeah.
turned tail and were out of there like that. So
Yeah.
illumination really has a deterrence not only on bad people, because that it certainly does. People associate, hey, bright light equals cop. That's
Yep.
what I have found is the case. But it's a great deterrence for animals too. So I cannot
Yeah.
encourage people enough. Carry a real powerful 1,000 lumen or such handheld light when you, especially if you're out and about. It's a great tool too if you're somewhere where you can't be armed with a firearm. That can be a
Yeah.
force multiplier, a powerful light.
100%. Always have multiple sources of light. I keep sources of light around my house, in my vehicle, on my person at all times. I've always got my little stream light, for instance, if nothing else, with 600 lumen on the bright side. And always light, light, light for sure. We would be remiss if we didn't discuss vehicles as it pertains to this whole topic that we're discussing today, and securing your vehicle against an attack or an invader or someone who wants to do bad things to you. Considerations for a car or a truck, or even an RV. Millions of people out there traveling and even living in RVs these days. If you're hanging your hat in it, or even if you're just traveling, and unfortunately, people even living in cars, people who don't have homes for whatever reason. But for whatever reason, let's talk about briefly. I know we're almost out of time, but securing your car against an attack, Sal.
Yeah, so now with the Castle Doctrine, this is going to be more state specific, and it's certainly not as clearly defined how Castle Doctrine applies to the vehicle. Now, an RV more so,
Yeah.
because that again is considered your temporary domicile. If you're parked in a campground in your RV, that's your home at the moment.
Yep.
Now, the vehicle with some case law has been treated as a domicile, and elsewhere
Yeah.
it has not. So it's a little bit more unclear. So, what I would encourage people to do is use the common sense regarding the vehicle. Remember that the vehicle is only property. So, if we're
Yeah.
going to look at using force to protect what is only property, it's not going to go for you legally, but there's a lot of caveats here, right? So, again,
Yeah.
if we're required to retreat, even in states with no stand your ground, you're only required to retreat if you can safely do so.
Yeah.
My argument would be if you are getting out of your car and somebody puts a gun in your face to carjack you, where can you go to safely retreat? If you're
Yeah.
in the vehicle and you have an armed aggressor trying to get you out of the car, where can you go to safely retreat? They are in the process of committing what is aggravated
Yeah.
assault, pointing
Yeah.
a weapon at you, right? That is, you're entitled to use lethal forces if you have to. The other thing I would say is if you have children in the vehicle, it is no longer a matter of protecting property, right? This is
Yep.
the one instance now where it's going to be very different. Let's say somebody mugs you of your car keys as you get out of the car, they jump in the car and drive off with it. If the car is empty and you shoot them through the windshield and kill them, you're going to have problems because you have just taken a human life to defend property. But if you've got two little kids in the back seat, it's no longer about defending property, right?
Yeah.
One strategy I've told people personally, if I got carjacked and somebody took my keys and they took the keys and turned away from me, that's it, I'm done. If the car is empty. It's a vehicle. I am not taking a human life over the vehicle. We can all argue that, oh, anybody who does that deserves it. Well, when you get convicted for second-degree murder, talk to me about it then, right? We don't go down that road of defending property. However, you have loved ones in the vehicle or anybody who's in the vehicle. I'm not letting that guy get in and leave with the vehicle, right?
Yeah,
so
we talked about disparity of what was a disparity of force, or really when the circumstances change with a child, or if you're disabled or you're injured, etc. That adds that disparity issue, and things change immediately.
Things change immediately. Now you're dealing with, if you have loved ones in the vehicle, that scumbag getting in the vehicle now is a direct threat to their life. So I'm going to do whatever I have to do. If I'm unarmed, I'm not letting them get in the vehicle. I'm going to go to hands. If I'm armed and he's got me at gunpoint and I hand him the keys, as soon as he turns away from me, I'm killing him, because he's not getting in that vehicle with people in it. If the vehicle has no people in it, he can take the vehicle.
There are so many different scenarios you can go over in your head, and a vehicle attacks and things like that. And if somebody walks over you, puts a gun to the window and says, give me your keys and your money, do you actually have time to put it in reverse and back out of your space and retreat? There's so many things to think about at that point. And then as we're talking about this car versus RV, you might be in an RV hooked up with the shoreline and your little stabilizers down, and there ain't no way in hell you can retreat in that scenario. You're in your castle at that point, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but if it were me, I would be going to more serious defense plans immediately at that point. So as much as we like and sit around and have our nice glass of fine scotch and a cigar at night and talk about scenarios and at guys' night out, we really need to think about, do we really want to live the rest of our life in prison over shooting someone for stealing our vehicle, or can we just let it go and let our insurance and hopefully the court system do its job at that point?
And Denny, what I would tell people is it's not, and it's not just the legal ramifications of it. If you kill some 17-year-old kid because he's taking your car, yes, granted, maybe he spends the rest of his life being a thug and hurts people and whatever, but we don't know. Maybe he turns things around and doesn't do that, right? Do we want to take a human life over property? So it is the legal, that's the big part of it. You have to remember the legalities of that. You cannot kill people over property, but this is a human life we're talking about. Would you really want to take a human life because they're taking your vehicle? Again, people in the vehicle. Now it's a whole different thing. The vehicle itself has nothing to do with it at that point. Now we're defending innocent human life, right? But just for property, you cannot do it legally. And I would argue that morally and ethically, you should really give that some thought as well.
I think we could talk all night on this topic.
Sure, yeah, sure.
And we've gone down some alleyways and some side roads. But just to kind of recap, Castle Doctrine, what is it? We've really kind of define that. We've come to the conclusion that Castle Doctrine does pertain to just about anywhere you are, but stand your ground does not. That's a legal definition. You'll find it some places you won't. I go back often to my friend Dave Kemp, whom I've interviewed several times on the channel here, 29-year retired law enforcement officer, who talks about being righteous in your actions, that righteous defense, that righteous shooting. And the bottom line is, when all is said and done, that jury of 12 people needs to know that whatever you did was the righteous thing to do, regardless of what the law was. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If you've got that child in the car and they break in, drive off with the car, you've got to do what you've got to do, and it's going to be the right thing. So anyway, backing up, which is a fantastic discussion, Sal. I'm going to try to wind this up today, and we may come back and revisit some certain aspects of this discussion. We're going to watch the comments of viewers and drop us comments. We really want to know what you think about this discussion, and have you ever been in any of these scenarios that we've discussed as it pertains to the Castle Doctrine, standing your ground, whether it's been at home, in a hotel room, in an outdoor space of some type, maybe you're camping, hunting, whatever, or in your vehicle. And I would suspect, Sal, that we're going to hear from some people who have experienced violence or an attack or some kind of scenario in one of these circumstances. I'm dying to see. I can't wait to see this video. At the taping of this video recording, we're going to drop it tomorrow, which should be Monday, December 4th. For those of you who are watching on this December 4th, this is the day the video drops. Drop those comments. Let us know. Sal, fantastic discussion. Thank you once again. Make sure you check out Sal's book, 21st Century Minuteman. We will drop that link in the description as well. And as well as a link to become a Survival Dispatch Insider. That is where you want to go to see all the awesome exclusive content that Big Tech wants to suppress. Boo for Big Tech. But we didn't trash that content altogether. We're continuing also to create that content, but we're putting it on a different form of media so that as a Survival Dispatch Insider, you will also have access to that. Sal, thanks again, buddy. You've been a great source of information and expertise. We really appreciate you. Folks, make sure you hit all those important buttons, like, subscribe, comment, and share. Hit those links. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.
I'm Jason Salyer with Survival Dispatch, and when disaster strikes, will you be ready? Power outages, natural disasters, economic collapse, and the knowledge, the skills, and equipment necessary to protect your family when it really, really matters. You can gain instant access to our team of survival experts, stockpiling food, medical necessities, communication plans, proven techniques to help you get home, shelter in place, or bug out safely. Don't leave your family's safety to chance. Visit survivaldispatch.com to get started.